my head is not cut off. There's always a really good chance my head is cut off. Hi YouTubers. I know you're my besties. Maybe my mum. Click subscribe for me. I haven't filmed a video for YouTube in a little while and I'm feeling like funky. Anyway, I'm here to chat today about what I do when people fuck with my kids. This is a long lesson journey for me, and the way I would have approached it like 10 years ago is completely different to the way I approach it now. But I think that this is going to help you, and it's going to give you a different way to look at things, a different perspective to shift into and to help you. It doesn't mean you have to use it all the time. It might not even feel right to you straight away, but hear me out. What do I do when people fuck with my kids? Can I say fuck? I'm sure I can, but I do all the time. So I have all different ages of kids. So my oldest is 12, heading closer to 13, a 10-year-old, I have to think about this, an 8-year-old and a 3-year-old. And the way you would respond to something that happens to a 3-year-old is completely different to what you do for older kids. And I think if you only have younger kids, it's kind of hard to understand. But if you have older kids, I'm hoping this is going to give you a shift in perspective to what you've already done or what you've already experienced. And it can help you really grow and shift. And it makes it really easy to, I want to say sever the cord, if you know about cord cutting, or divorce yourself from the situation, or just like move away from it. Now, the reason I'm talking about this is because someone has been messing about with my kids' heads a little bit and being manipulative and being hurtful and harmful. And it's kind of upsetting for everyone, and it's something they're experiencing a few times in a week. So it's something that's kind of challenging for them and is coming up over and over again. The situation and the people don't really matter, because I think it's totally irrelevant to what I'm going to describe, but I'll try and give you some examples as best as I can. So basically, my kids are in situations sometimes, and they have been more often before. It's not really very common anymore, but when I talk to mums, especially in the same age groups, it seems to be a really common occurrence. Things like teachers being difficult, or like things in sports coming up that the parents don't know how to deal with, or even friendships between kids, how to manage the parents, how to manage the kids, all those kinds of things. And the way I look at it, I feel is completely different to most other people, or most other even experts in terms of the parenting. We're sort of like, how can we go to that person, or how can we solve the problem, or how can we shift it, or how can we change it? And I'm going to challenge you to come to the understanding that if your child is in a situation, most of the time that's having some emotional manipulation, physical is going to be different. You cannot shift that for them. You can advocate for them if you desire to, but it's unlikely that's going to actually change anything. If they are in physical harm's way, you have a responsibility as a parent to remove them. And if the emotional manipulation is too much, you also have that same responsibility. So your biggest responsibility here is to decide, do I stay or do I go in the emotional situation? Physical needs to just be dealt with. But the next scenario is realizing that when our kids are in challenging situations, and I'm going to say anytime from like 5 and up, depending on the emotional maturation of the child, our job is not to fight for them. Our job is not to go in guns blazing and fix the problem for our kids, as easy as that may seem. Our job is to hold the emotional stability for our kids and to remind them of their own empowerment in the situation. So the same as if you're having a challenging situation yourself, your job isn't to go and fight with the person that let's say it's your work colleague, and they're doing some annoying shit and you know it needs to be dealt with and you know it needs to be changed. It might be like emails or something they're doing at their desk or lunch breaks or whatever. It's not your job to go and shift and change that person. It's not your job to go and fight with them. Your job is to learn how to adapt to the situation that's existing and adjust your own behaviors so that the person can deal with their own stuff. This is really different to large workplaces, large education systems where we're taught like a monopoly of power. So you're taught to engage the various levels, let's say like a HR system, where you essentially dob on the person who's doing the wrong behavior and hope that that system eventually brings it through the tiers. And it's the same in all jobs, but it doesn't work in relationships. You know, you can't go and dob on your husband, and it doesn't work in emotional situations with colleagues. As much as we all want it to look and sound like that is the process and that is what works, it usually never ends well. If you've ever been part of a HR process, it doesn't end in the nicest of ways. Actually, it can be deeply traumatic for all parties involved. Rather than the person, no matter what kind of embodiment they have in the situation, learning how to personally manage themselves and personally resource themselves to manage the situation no matter what. So an example of that could be that, you know, when I was in a workplace and we were all working together in a really small enclosed place, and I would often work through my lunch break just because of the style of how I worked, and that was like what kept me up to date, and I would just eat and work at the same time. A lot of people in government jobs do, but many of the other women like to sit around the table and chat for a long time during that time. And I was like, well, this is hard to work in. Okay, so I can either tell them to go to the lunchroom and eat there, or I could like ask them to do something else. Rather than doing that or feeling frustrated or getting mad, which I did sometimes, of course, I would just pack my stuff up and go to the next classroom I taught and work in there. Okay? And so that's what we're trying to teach our children. Teach, show, love, support them into having the personal resources to shift and change, rather than trying to change the other people around them. So if your child wanted to get noticed more in class and they're not noticed a lot, they're kind of the type that would blend in and not be seen very much. They don't have any bad behaviors. They're not super duper smart, or, you know, like whatever reason that they kind of blend into the background. You would talk to your child. So instead of going to the teacher and saying, well, I think you're ignoring my child, or I think you're not actually supporting them with what they need and they need more attention and blah, blah, blah. What I would start to do is start to teach my child how to be seen more, or how to embody themselves into the space. I think I've talked about this on a podcast before, where one of my girls was struggling to enter like a new dancing space, and it was for a specialist type thing, and all the girls were like super amazing, and it was one of those situations where like she didn't have the same level of skills and she felt very shy and very inadequate. And I was like, each week we're going to go in the car, I'll just chat. And she was like crying and not wanting to go, but I knew she wanted to commit to this process, and I would talk to her in the car. I wouldn't actually mention it all week, but when we got in the car, I would say, like, I want you to pick 2 people you're going to talk to. 2 people that might hang out on their own, or they might need some support too. And I'm going to get you to ask the teacher one question, looking them in the eye and asking them one question. I'm just going to challenge you every time to do this. It's not kind of any set rule. I'm just going to get you to try and integrate yourself better. And these are the ways you would do it. Look people in the eye more. Speak louder and clearer. Ask a question, no question too silly. Like, do those things and see what happens. Well, the first 2 weeks that I did it, she did nothing and came out probably even maybe a little bit more upset. And the third week, I forgot to even talk about it on the way. We were busy chatting and eating and blah, blah, blah. But the amazing thing is the third week she came out and she was like, Mum, I did it. I talked to these 2 girls and we sat and chatted for ages and had a snack, and I was talking to the teacher about this one bit that I found really hard. And I was like, oh, there's the work. I didn't really care how well she did in the actual experience itself, but learning, obviously the most difficult part of this was the social integration. And so your kids are going to have other challenges, like maybe they are struggling academically to keep up, or often people will say to me their kids don't read enough or they don't do enough sport or those types of things. And I would challenge you to encourage them, not through what you tell them just to do, but like, if I ever want my kids to read more, I just have to read more. If I want my kids to find pleasure in some kind of educational support, then I find pleasure in educational support. If I want them to get better at something, usually I integrate it myself. And then I also talk to them about the skills that they might need to do to be seen more. They might need to ask for more help. They might need to look directly at someone. You know, one of my other girls is like, when a girl feels shy in one of my classes, I'll often look at her and compliment her on something that she's wearing, or her earrings, or her hairstyle. I'll find a connection point between us to start the conversation. And I thought this was, you know, I feel like in a day and age where we're like supposed to be so neutral on everything and not recognize how people present themselves necessarily. But I feel like this is such a lovely skill to have, to understand that you could connect to someone through something they've tried hard in their physical appearance so that they could be seen, and then they're almost making themselves not be seen. And so she uses that as a connection point. And so when people are fucking with my kids and doing the wrong thing by them, I don't feel any need to go and fix the person who's doing it, because I can look at the person and know that if you're doing that to someone, you are experiencing horrible things in your life. It's like people who shout at kids. I think it's wrong and I don't like it, but I have the understanding that the person who's shouting is obviously going through some shit in their head that they can't see past. And so my job isn't to change that person. That person will stop shouting when they no longer need to shout and be seen. And so my job is to give my children their own level of self-advocacy, so that if they're in a job where they cannot work easily with the person next to them, they know how to shift and change themselves, almost like a chameleon, to either be seen or to not be seen, or to leave, you know, to also give the opportunity of like, okay, you're not being treated well, shall we finish it up? I'm more than happy with that. Always being able to say clearly, like, no more, or yes, I'm fine with this, but I'm going to shift and change it for myself. And so that's what I'm going to encourage you to do with your kids. If someone is fucking with your kids, you're going to empower your kids with specific skills to manage that situation. You don't have to deep dive into it or go like really super deep. You just have to explain, like, what would you do differently next time? How could you, if your child is disruptive in a class or annoying or naughty, what other things, so it's really easy to go, well, the classroom's wrong for them, or the teacher's wrong for them, or those kinds of things. Where could you sit that's going to make you be more productive? What could you do every time you know you want to talk to the person next to you? What could you do instead? constantly empowering them with making different choices. And often you won't see a change for ages, weeks, maybe even months, of you just constantly like giving little tips, giving little ideas. I used to put a stone that I found on the ground in my kids' pocket when they miss me. And I'd be like, rub the stone, you know mama loves you, you're okay. It doesn't have to be as complicated. You do not have to, it's not your job to, and you know, there are people out there who fight for their kids, and that is right for them. And if you have ever fought for your kids, that is perfectly fine. I'm not saying that these choices are bad. I'm saying the more we can empower our kids with their own self-capacity, the sooner we are going to see crazy shifts and changes for them as humans. I love you. Wherever you are, whatever you're experiencing, you've got this. I know it's going to shift and change for you and get so much better.